Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. The Mandela Effect is something that is getting more and more attention these days. The way it's talked about is a collective lie. People remembered something happened in a certain way even though every piece of evidence said it didn't. Nelson Mandela, who was president of South Africa from 1994 until his death in 2013, is the inspiration for the name. Even though these things are true, a lot of people remember that he died in prison in the 1980s while fighting against apartheid. There are a lot of other examples, and I've been through a few of them myself. I think it was a shade of pink that was almost magenta. The shell is green. I looked on Wikipedia to see when Jeff Peanut Butter changed its name from Jeffy to Jeff. They never did, and no matter what the internet or the books in my parents' attic say, it was always spelled Berenstein when I was a kid. It was Berenstein, though, and most people agree on that. Boy, people sure have bad memories. People with false memories may have come from a parallel dimension that is almost the same as the one they came from. This is a serious idea that has been around for a long time. Now, these sizes are so close to each other that the only thing that's different is a small detail. The guy in Monopoly wears something, but he doesn't. Based on this theory, if someone has a lot of false memories, it means they've jumped between dimensions more than once. They might be a little confused by how reality doesn't match up with what they remember, but they're otherwise unharmed other than having vague memories that are easy to get wrong. The other thing that all Mandela Effect events have in common is that no one can say for sure when they cross dimensions. Most of the time, the false memories started years ago, often when the person was a child. However, people can't remember when things started to change. There was one time I felt them and another time I didn't. But that's how it was when I was young. I remember when the jump happened to the second. I know it happened in a minute or two, and I know what changed. So, it wasn't a small thing. I was always going to remember the summer of 1994. In some way, my dad's youngest brother, Uncle John, and his wife had just had their third daughter, Allison. Their two older girls, who were 9 and 7, were older than Allison. To help the happy couple figure out how to live with their new baby, Uncle Mike, who is my dad's older brother, said he would take the kids on a 2-week road trip. Mike was always a little strange, and not just because he always drove a note Winnebago camper as his main means of getting around. I don't think you could do that now with how much gas costs, but I'm getting off track. When I was 17, my parents agreed that my brothers and I should take a road trip to visit my cousin. My older brother Danny came along because it was useful. Uncle Mike wanted to drive us up and down a lot of the mid-Atlantic region so we could see family and see some sights. Danny was way too old to hang out with a bunch of kids who were still in elementary school. But it made sense to use another person and a driver's license to spell Mike's name. Even though I didn't see a good reason to bring my brother David, I did. He was only 5, and even though I loved him after a while, I thought he was the most annoying person in the world when I was 10. I told my mom over and over that he shouldn't come because it would just get in the way, but she didn't back down. If I wanted to leave, David would finally wake up. I relented. The trip was great on its own. We started out in Ohio, where a distant uncle who was the pastor of a local church put on a festival with rides, cotton candy, and everything else. We went through Harrisburg to visit Hershey Park and tour the governor's mansion. On the way to the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, and to see some second cousins on a river ferry near Annapolis, our car lost its air conditioning. The planned length of the trip was 10 days, and looking back, it's crazy how many things there are. We were able to watch him for that short time. The motorhome itself was not very big. It had a small kitchenette, a table, a couch, and even a bathroom. But the only bed was a small one on top of the cabin. Well, we were all very happy while we were driving. There was no way that Winnebago could have enough room for all of us to sleep. My dad and Uncle John gave Uncle Mike money so that we could stay in hotels along the way. Like I said, Mike was a little strange, and for some reason, we could only stop at gas stations. And if you were going to stay in a hotel, you would only stay at the Marriott. We always had 2 rooms next to each other, one for Uncle Mike and Danny and the other for us in the kid room. They would sleep in the same bed. And if I thought David was the most annoying little kid in the world before the trip, that meant Dave and I got each other. No, I didn't think so. At home, we had shared a room since soon after he was born. But at least we had our own beds there. No, the way he sucked his thumb kept me up all night. Once I finally fell asleep, he would always come into my room an hour or 2 later and wake me up. My space. He's sucking and slurping so close to my ear that I can hear it. It was terrible. I was ready to be done with it after a week. One last thing I want to mention is that, even though all the places we went were great in their own right, our younger kids had some of the most fun at the hotel pools, even though we only stayed at Marriott. We were always surprised by how different the designs were at each franchise location. Hey, Abby, David, and I always spend the time in the pool at every stop, splashing, racing, and having a great time in general. Our last stop was in New York City, but we didn't get there until very late at night. I don't know how many groups of mostly 10 and under tourists have walked the streets of Manhattan and used the subways at 2 a.m. But we made one more on July 8, 1994. As usual, Uncle Mike had reserved rooms for us that were already taken. It was the one next to the World Trade Center in particular. We slept in late that morning and went to the Empire State Building and Ellis Island to look for records of our ancestors. We had just reached the base of the Statue of Liberty when they came through. Uncle said he might give us 2 choices, since we had to go home the next morning, and it would take almost 3 hours to get the crown. Should we wait in line or go back to the hotel and check out the pool? There was only one vote. I remember that, among other annoying things about David, it took him a long time to get into his swimsuit. He was just getting the hang of tying knots, and it made me want to scream. He wouldn't let me help him, so I had to watch him with a quarter in a suit. I couldn't wait to tell them. Many have been thrown away. Making plans. We had one last minute at the pool. It closed at 6, but it was almost 5. No matter what I said, he wouldn't let me help him tie this silly thing. David was finally ready, so we rushed to the elevator with the girls. As I said before, even though we've only stayed at Marriott, we've seen a lot of cool layouts during the trip. Some had cabanas, others diving boards, and one had real palm trees on a fake beach, but this was the first to have a real water slide that was even better than this 1 and 3. And, even better, it looks like we are the only ones using the pool. The bottom of the slides went into a part of the main pool that was kind of like an add-on. To get to the top, you took the stairs to the right. 3 flights took off. Each of the 15 stairs has a sign on the wall. Slide on the red at your own risk. No lifeguard was working. I remember everything about that trip to the pool like it was yesterday. The pool itself was about what you'd expect from a hotel pool. Not much to talk about. So, we began at the slide, of course. We did only have so much time. I looked at the time. Once we got to the top, We looked at the clock to see how much time was left. Dorinda, David, and it's not time to read 5 or 2. There were 4 of us and 3 knights. Abby and Allison took the first 2 spots, and I went to the 3rd one. David hit me on the arm. In his eyes, he had the kind of silly fear that only 5-year-olds can have. He begged me. I kept talking and left him scratching the air with his fingers. I told him to stop acting like a baby, and just follow me down. The girls were already ahead of me in the race, and I didn't want to be left behind. I went down the slide headfirst. I shout into the pool, at a speed that surprises me. So quickly, she could tell that this would be a great last day. I got out of the water by pulling myself up. He sat in the wheels by the pool and looked forward to going down the slide. Yeah, Listen and Abby were talking excitedly, and heading back up the stairs. I thought about going with him, but a small, very small brotherly instinct made me want to make sure David didn't need help getting out of the pool. I waited and waited until I heard 2 high-pitched shrieks coming from inside the tubes. A few seconds later, the curls came flying out with a huge splash. I asked him where David was. Was he on top? Too afraid to go down by himself? Both of my cousins gave me a confused look. What did I want to say? What did David do? I was sure they were playing a joke on me. I told them that it wasn't funny to mess around and that they should stop and be serious. What was David doing? As only sisters can, they both rolled their eyes at the same time. They went back up the stairs and told me they wouldn't waste my time with stupid jokes. I stood there stunned and tripping. I kept my eyes on the slide, hoping that David would come out of one of the tubes. I waited 2 more minutes until the girls and other torrents were done. I didn't talk to them again about evil. I wasn't going to fall for whatever they were trying to do. When I finally got back to the top, my watch read 5:06. I told myself that I would find David there sniffling and trying not to cry. But David was still alive and well, and the entrance to the slide was empty. The only sound was the girls hitting the water again, which was a long way below. Danny and Uncle Mike are people I want to find. They were sitting in the room and watching something on the TV. Now it was me who was almost in tears. Then it was set up, and it was definitely on the bed. Uncle Mike ran to the doorway where I stood and asked what was wrong or if I was hurt. I had to take a minute to calm down. 2 people told me in a shaky way that I had lost my little brother. They had no idea who I was talking about. I started screaming and flailing around. He was not there. Why were people all zooming? Danny tried to hug me awkwardly, but I pushed his arms away. I did not whisper. What was David doing? Uncle Mike picked up the phone that was on the nightstand between the 2 beds. He told me that I was scaring him, but that we could call my parents if that would help. I yelled at him to do it because the towel-wrapped door is white. About the time the connection went through, my mom asked what was going on in a worried tone, but I was instantly calmed by it. Everybody was acting badly. I told her that David had gone missing and that no one would help me look for him. She was quiet for a long time, and then she told me not to worry and to call Uncle Mike again. He whispered to her for a few minutes, so I couldn't hear, but he kept looking over at where I was sitting on the bed. When they were done talking, he let me leave. My mom told me to do what Uncle Mike and Danny said, that she'd see me soon, and that David was fine. Did I see when I got home? The same bathroom is where I changed. An hour ago, did not? David and I would argue until he let me help him tie his bathing suit. We packed up the Winnebago quickly and drove away. P and Allison stayed together on the couch in the back of the camper and watched me nervously while I sat at a small table in the kitchenette. I kept my mouth shut. All 8 hours of the trip home. After midnight, Uncle Mike had just pulled the camper into our driveway when I jumped out and ran to the back door, where my mom was standing with her bathrobe wrapped around her. My dad waited behind her with bated breath. What was David doing? I asked her in a soft voice if he was okay. She took my hand and led me back to her room inside the house. When we walked in, my mouth fell open. Everything was different now. There was still my favorite bed. Sure, but underneath, where David's twin usually slept, was a desk covered in drawings and a small bookcase full of Bruce Colville paperbacks and Star Wars books. My mom told me that it had been a very long and busy trip and that I needed to get some sleep in my own bed. She told me that everything would be better in the morning, but if it wasn't, she could call a doctor and set up an appointment for me. She told me that I shouldn't worry about anything because everything would be fine. I felt something heavy as a stone drop into my chest just above my stomach. I fell to my knees and let out a gut-wrenching sob. I started shaking so hard that I could have stopped if I had tried. I couldn't stop crying as heartache, pain, and guilt tore through me. And I think my mind broke a little bit the next day. It was a Saturday, but my mom was able to call around and find a counselor with weekend hours. He was called Mr. Calabrese, but I could call him Mr. C. And for 5 years, I met with him twice a week. We talked about a lot of different things, but David was a common topic. Mr. C. Hope showed me that he loved me and that it was impossible for my whole family to work together to hurt me. That somehow, the things I remembered about David were just false. You had never tried to play stupid kitty games with me or broken one of my toys by accident. When he was little, he was scared when I would reach down from my loft bed so he could stand and barely grab my fingers with his own. The feeling of his hand in mine in my memories was not real, and neither was he. Since the trip, I've had a mostly happy and useful life. I went to college, got married, and now have my own kids. I still talk to my parents, and Danny Gary says the same thing. We're not far apart. We take turns coming to see each other for holidays and going to Disney World on vacation. Every single thing. Uncle Mike died of a stroke in 2018. So that was a bummer, but Uncle John, his wife Abby Allison, and their little sister Anna are still doing fine. My mom didn't talk about it for a long time because I think she didn't want to upset me or mess up my therapy, but it was long enough ago. In one night, after a few Aperol spritzes, she told me that she and my dad had tried for a third child 4 years after I was born and even got pregnant when I was 4.5. If it was a boy, she would have lost it at 8 weeks. They would give him a name. David. Someone hearing this story, and me arguing that my story isn't an example of the Mandela Effect after all. By definition, the phenomenon is a group of people who all have the same false memory. For example, I went to midnight mass with my parents last Christmas when I went to visit them. I was talking to a woman a few years older than me whose family my parents have known for more than 30 years. She asked me how my brother David was doing that. She hadn't seen them since they got out of 8th grade. It took me a second to answer, but I told her he was fine and that was that. I thought that would be the easiest way. If the alternative explanation for the Mandela Effect is the real one, then the people who have these memories are actually traveling between dimensions. Then David is somewhere in the world. I sometimes wonder, was I the one who went between worlds? Or did he mean that the New York Marriott where we stayed, along with most of the World Trade Center complex, was destroyed by terrorists on September 11th. So even if I wanted to go back as an adult and look around to see if I could find proof of tech eons, wormholes, or something else, I couldn't. But I was able to find at least one picture of the pool area that looked just like what I remembered. But David has taken the hotel and everything around it, no matter where you are. I hope you know how much we care about you. I hope that one day, no matter how small the chance, it will happen. I went back to a different world with you in it. I hope it's one where you get to meet your niece and nephew. I hope you are here. We went down the last life together because I made a different choice. I hope it will be one where we both come out on top.